Cool. So welcome everyone. We're going to get started. Thanks for signing up for today's meetup. Today we're going to go through GraphQL Codegen, which is a tool to help write more effective operations, just be more efficient at writing GraphQL, which I've been doing a lot of recently. So I'm excited to see what we've got in store. So the host today is C. Mohammed, and yeah, he's joining us from Morocco. Really excited to see what we've got here. And yeah, if you have any questions, just leave them in the chat or in the QA, and we'll answer them probably at the end, but maybe during. So yeah, real quick before he gets started, this chat is brought to you by LogRocket. And oops, I just lost my screen here. And yeah, LogRocket's a front-end application monitoring solution. It's really great for production testing of really anything in a web or mobile application. But since we're talking about GraphQL today, I figured I'd show you kind of just how to set up in LogRocket, how to monitor for slow GraphQL requests. And what's really great about LogRocket is you can do this performance monitoring up front in your application and then see exactly what users were doing that caused a slow request or caused a failed request. So I'm looking at LogRocket metrics right now. And basically, it's really simple. So, I want to see all users who have a LogRocket email. I want to show you our customers, and then have a request to our users endpoint with a duration of greater than a second. So once I get kind of the list of users, I get a replay of exactly what happened during their session. So if I go search for our users endpoint here, oops. Just our GraphQL endpoint. I can go, pick any duration, like we've got a slow one here, and go back to that point to see exactly where it occurred, just to see like what part, you can see me browsing over here, what part of our app actually kicked off this really slow request. And you can really easily debug GraphQL. So yeah, I'll pass it over now. So yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna share my screen. Hi everyone, my name is Mohammed. I'm a front-end developer.
We still can't. Oh, there it goes. Okay, you're all set.
So yeah, my name is Mohammed. As I said, I hope you can see my screen. Yes. So I'm a front-end developer, and I write actually for LogRocket quite a bit. And today I'm going to be talking about GraphQL Code Generator. And what it does for us, actually, it seamlessly gives us types from our backend to use in our front-end code base, and that could be utilized in on the server, on the front end, even in our test environment, as we will see today. And it's not only strictly with one backend or two. We can use multiple backends, and that's what we're going to show today. That power use of this great tool. So you can find all the codes for today on this GitHub repo at SMHMD GraphQL Codegen demo, and we're gonna kick it up. I actually have it cloned right here, and I'm gonna see installation, how to write effective operations, how to manage GraphQL endpoints, and ESLint integration with this tool, and much more. Even how to write plugins for the tool. And yeah, let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to show is the installation, and you can go to their website, and you will need GraphQL because this tool utilizes a lot of APIs and pieces, functions, and stuff from the official GraphQL npm package. So you're going to need to install that, and then you're going to install the CLI from GraphQL Codegen, and that's it. Then you will only need multiple plugins for working with the tool. There is a wizard that you can do if you install it through the wizard. It's going to prompt you to ask a few questions if you are working with a React app, a Next app, or an Angular app, or something like that, and it get you start forward. But we're going to do a manual setup step. Yeah, so as I said, this is just a CLI, and to utilize it, you're gonna need some plugins. And one of the plugins that you're gonna almost always install is TypeScript. And as you may know, GraphQL is a a typed language, much as TypeScript. And this plugin right here is what translates all those types from GraphQL to TypeScript for other plugins to work with. So that's why you're always going to see this plugin right here used by other or required by other plugins. The same goes for TypeScript operations, which looks at operations, those queries and mutations and fragments we have, and it generates types for those as well. So these two are, always going to be installed with other plugins. So let's take a look at. So we have here a Next.js tab, and I took the liberty to add some, a little bit of code here. One of which is this codegen.yaml, and right here we have some options. We have them here. One of which is overwrite. This is gonna essentially overwrite each and every time when we generate, so we don't have stale data from stale types from our backend or something like that. And we're essentially going to generate multiple files, two for our API. So let's imagine for a second that we have two backends in this code base. One is our actual API, backend API, and the other one coming from a CMS or something like that for our content. And this is the scenario that I chose here. So for our API, for our primary backend, we're gonna generate two files, one for the client and one for the server. And when this helps is while writing Next.js applications, the client, you can run functions or hooks or whatever on the client, but you cannot do that on the server that the environment that Next.js provided. So that's why we have multiple endpoints or multiple generated files. And if you attempt to import from one file in a server file from a client file, it's going to throw an error. So this separation is quite it's good for those kinds of situations. And as you can see, we have a schema that is also generated, and we're going to look into this. Why is it a file? Where is this file? And so on. And the short answer is because we are caching these schemas. Sometimes schemas can be up to 4 megabytes of size, and you don't want to download that schema each time you change an operation or something. So having a cache is really important. And as I told you before, with our plugins, we have the TypeScript and TypeScript operations. And on the client generated file, I went with React Query as the plugin that we'd like to use for our GraphQL operations. And we can provide a configuration for these plugins. And one of which here for the React Query is the hook that is going to be utilized, and we can take a look at that here. So just a hook that is going to help us fetch our data from the backend. It's special. You can use the default hook, but I find that you can. This is better because you can bake in authentication. You can do some cool stuff like prompting the user not to close the window if you are fetching and stuff like that. So yeah, this is the fetcher we are using, and we denote that it's a React hook. As for on the server, I actually went with something called GraphQL request. It doesn't require, it's not React specific, so we can run it on the server, and we're gonna take a look at it shortly. For the content, I'm gonna actually introduce very quickly the CMS that I used, which is GraphCMS, and I spun up a boilerplate thingy that they have, and we can go to their playground and play with their GraphQL and stuff. And we're going to use these operations in our code base. The other thing is that you can go to the project settings and stuff and get the environments. Get the environments and tokens and stuff. So I just stuffed those things inside the env file, and we're gonna use those to get the schema and also to do cool things later on. Like run those operations inside VS Code. So that's why we have the token and stuff like that. So at last, we have this global configuration for all our plugins. And I'm gonna go back to this later on when we can look at each and every thing we generate. So let's do that right now. So in our content or API, you can see that they are almost the same, and both of them have this schema.yaml, which is another Codegen configuration that we are using. This time, the schema is taken from our environment variable. So those environment variables that that we were using, we get them here, and we can even do some authorization to get those schemas. And we use a plugin called introspection, which what it does, it just gets the schema and it transforms it into, or converts it into a JSON file that we can use for development offline. And that's what we are doing. We also minify it, and we store it in this content generated schema.json. That's the very same schemas that we've seen before. Needless to say that we, in our git ignore, we just ignore those generated files altogether. They're going to generate multiple things, and we don't need them on our version control. One other thing you can see here is this, weird looking bash script, and this is just a nicety. It's not. It has nothing to do with GraphQL, but with GraphQL Codegen. But what it just does, sometimes we need that schema to re-download, so to force that download, and we just add a like an environment variable which called generate schema to true, and if we trigger this bash script, it's going to actually download whether we want or not. And it also sees if we have those generated files. If we don't, it's going to generate. So right here, if I don't have that generated schema, if I don't have it set to true, it's just going to skip the generation and move on. But if I wanted to actually generate, it's going to take time and download this. And this is the reason I said sometimes it takes even more than this to download. You don't want this to happen on each and every change. So yeah, we do this for both the contents and on the API. In our package.json, this is actually part of the generation command we have here. So if you run yarn gen, we are going to get those schemas before we run our primary Codegen file. And yeah, just to go back to this configuration file, when we generate those schemas, I actually have them hidden using right here. So if we take a look at what is actually generated, you can see that we have a bunch of stuff from React Query. This is the client, React Query, and that use fetch that we defined as our fetcher, and some other stuff. And you will also see that we have this upload thing that we get from this particular endpoint. And usually it's going to be any, because it wouldn't, GraphQL Codegen would not know what is this, and on the backend it's defined using a scalar, but we don't have scalars on frontend. So that's what that global configuration is. So each and every scalar, we're just gonna change something to another thing. So if it's an email, we're just going to say it's a string. And this is important because sometimes you're going to have that. Without this, you're going to have an email, property or something, and it's going to be any. So it is best to have this set up and just go through your generated files and see if you have anything set to any, and just come here and fix it. So if you have a limited string 1 or 2 or many scalars or new scalars in your backend, you're just going to have to fix it right here. So this is it for our primary configuration file. And as I said, we have these generated files. So just take a look at the server one. It's taken this time from GraphQL requests. And yeah, we are generating here all the things that we need. An SDK for downloading, for fetching things on the server and stuff like that. You're gonna have to look into that particular plugin and the SDK or the tool associated with it, and see the documentation to work with these things. And this is the schema that I talked about. It's just gibberish, but it's offline and we can use it without download or anything. So this is, I'm just gonna have to hide this again. One other thing that we are gonna come to later is the file. It's just how to make VS Code work with these with GraphQL and stuff. And just a note that we would like to recognize the GQL files as GraphQLs. This is not done by default. We're going to come back to this. In our queries and mutations and fragments, we can add operations or documents. They're called multiple things. So yeah, we have some syntax highlighting here, and we can see what's the operation called and stuff like that. And just to take a look now at the code before we come back to these operations and see what we can do with them, I'm gonna run yarn dev, and it's gonna run the generator for me too. So in our page here, we have a bunch of code, and one of the things that we have is this use countries query from the API. It was generated. Just take a look at this API file. This is the index file for the API. So we're just getting that SDK, and this is for the server, and we are exporting everything from the client. So exporting everything from the SDK from the server and everything from the client. In our page right here, we get that React query hook, and we just get the data, and we loop over it and display something with those countries. And the same could be said for the authors, but this time we get them on the server with the get server side props. So we just get that content from and we await that and add it as props. We have an interface here for the page props, and we just include it for the get server props and the page at the same time. So we are in sync of what kind of props we have, and that's the author. And again, we loop over it and display an author component. So that's what we have here. A couple of authors that we get from our CMS. As you can see, and a bunch of countries from another endpoint that could be our backend. And yeah, you can see that I'm not actually using any types from our generated files. So what's the point? We're going to try to do this, but there's a tricky thing here. So the author type is actually more vast than we are actually getting. So the author type has many things. We have ID, history, name, picture, and stuff. But in our query, we are simply getting an ID, a name, and a title. So you see that disparity, and that actually makes sense, because if we are getting only these things, only these three things, ID, name, and title, we should not type our things as more than that, which is all of this. So we're going to have to do a little bit of omitting or a little bit of picking. So one way to fix this is the author type, and we're going to get the ID and get the name and everything. But that's not scalable. A better way or the right way to fix this is actually to introduce a fragment. So in our query right here, in our fragment, we're just going to get an author.GraphQL fragment. And just write a fragment author and copy paste this here. And replace this with the author. Let's see what actually is going on here. Yeah, maybe something is,
Is it the space before ID in the fragment?
It shouldn't actually do that. But I'm just gonna go for the API. Maybe there's some issue here. So back up here and remove this fragment. And it works. I really don't know what's going on with the other thing. But yeah, here we can tap into that specific fragment and or go to it. But what this allows us to do is, if we go to our so I'm just going to go for the country example here. In our country component, we did the same mistake, and we actually wrote the type manually. So instead of that, we're just going to use the country fragments, and that's the difference between the country type and the country fragment. So you can see here that it's only those things. So I'm just going to. The country fragment is just the name and the emoji, exactly what we are asking the backend to give us. So if we add something like state code, for instance, it's going to regenerate those things and give us the right type for those things that we asked for. So that's something that you have to understand and always keep in mind, that we are not working with types most of the time. We're just working with fragments. And whenever you have a component that tries to render something specifically, it is best to go back to operations and create a fragment for that component. So it's always something you have to keep in mind. So yeah, this is how you write effective endpoints. And one other, small thing. Sometimes, you have a typo in the backend field or something like that, or you just don't like the name or whatever. You can actually rename things. So let's just rename this to M, and it's gonna regenerate, and we're gonna have to change this to M. So if you need to alias anything, this is how you can do it. As you have seen while I work with these, we have here auto completion, and we also have a little bit of linting. So how is that achieved? One thing that we have is in our extensions, it's an extension called, did I not? Sorry, I did not include it. But it's a GraphQL extension that you can easily find, this one. And it gives us syntax highlighting and a little bit of validation. But validating on your IDE is not, the full picture, and shouldn't always, you might be using VS Code, but another person is using Vim. So you can't really trust validation on the IDE. So we're actually going to use ESLint to do our validation. And to do that, it's going to fix quickly what I Yeah, just to take a quick look here, there's an ESLint repo called GraphQL ESLint just for integrating ESLint with GraphQL. You can read through this. It's pretty lengthy, and you can find all the available rules right here. So just install the the package, and you include it as likewise. So you go to an ESLint file, and the reason why I'm extending our original file instead of writing the overrides inside the ESLint is because we are using multiple schemas. So this file right here, although it's completely, pretty much identical to the other ESLint file, we are using multiple schemas to validate against our operations. And that's what gives us, different, let's just say, for instance, that you have in your backend, you are using Apollo, and it's pretty much you always need to have an ID included, in your operation. So, but that's not the same for your content operations or something like that. So you just go to this file and change the rules. And this is not even the rules that I personally use, because first you're going to have to look at your personal preferences and stuff and come up with something sensible. And second, I had to change this this file 3 times in the past, I think 4 months or something, because they keep changing role names and deprecating ones and adding new ones. So you're going to have maybe to come back to this pretty often. But as I said, we have a bunch of rules, some of which are requiring an ID if you have it. So if an ID is available, you always have to have it. And just look at this, look into this, and construct what works for you. This works with Husky and link staged and multiple stuff. So if there's any issues with your operations, it's not going to even let you commit to to your repo. The other thing, as I said, is the extension, and the extension has a configuration file that you can use, which is this GraphQL Code config.js. It actually also accepts YAML, but there's a problem with .env thingies where the environment with the YAML, extension. And this is why I'm using here a JS file and and requiring the .env explicitly. But what we are doing here is just exporting a object that has multiple projects, the API and the content, and we are saying that our schema lives here and so on and so forth. And what this allows us to do, if we go, for instance, to the author again and click execute the query, we actually get the response from the CMS. So we have almost GraphQL environments here, minus the documentation. We can write our operations with autocomplete. We can have, so if I delete the ID here, it's gonna yell at me and tell me that you need an ID there because it's available. And if I butcher some name like this, it's gonna give me a hint that maybe you meant name. So in that regard, it's a really nice development experience. Yeah, as we covered the VS Code integration and the caching of our GraphQL schemas. So the last thing that we would like to include right here is the, let me just go to our pages. As you can see, we have, I'm not entirely sure what's the issue here, but let's just ignore it for a moment. As I said, we have client-side code and server-side code. So if we want to fetch this countries on the server, we only need to write we will get the countries on the server side, add them to our props, and add them here as GraphQL React query hook. So that's the client. The reason, again, because we cannot use hooks inside Git server props. So yeah, the other environment that we are interested in making things work on is the testing environment. So I'm just gonna undo all of these things, as well as just very quickly, I'm going to so we introduced the mock directory here, and we're actually using MSW for our mocking. So I'm not sure if you ever heard of MSW. It's a really good mocking library for our server, our client. It works, universally with REST and GraphQL, and we can use it with software as well. So when we are using these mocks, we would know that the backend changed something or the other, and we come and update our mocks. So the integration is really simple. You just require the server mocks, but if you have if not, you just on the browser and you start the worker. But we have our data here. For instance, the authors. We just use Faker and generate 3 authors, and the same goes for our countries and so on. And we use them as handlers. And yeah, I did not mention this earlier, but we have that as another plugin for our server. So we have the MSW plugin here. And in our handlers, we can see that this is actually typed. So if I, let's just say something else. You can see auto-completion and stuff. So this is the authors. The other thing is that if you hover on this, you get nice, documentation of exactly what you are going to have to give back. And if we even had variables, we're going to see them here, that this is the variable that you can access on the request. So yeah, for this to work, we just add that plugin. But let's take a look at creating these plugins, because actually I was the one to write this MSW plugin. So for that, I'm just going to again add a utils file and just add a plugin.js for us. It's going to need to be JS because if you'd like to use TypeScript, obviously you can, and you have to compile it. At the end of the day, GraphQL Codegen would need a JS file. That's all you need to know. So you can write in JS or TypeScript. I would recommend TypeScript, but it needs a little bit of setup. So just to look very quickly into this, how to write your plugins, all you need is a file that exports a plugin method and returns a bunch of strings. So we're gonna look into this. We're actually gonna change this to prepend and contents. If you go to our Codegen and just even all of this, and use that file as our plugin. So let's use plugin.js. You're going to see those imports and that contents. So right here. If we had any imports, they go in the prepend property. And if we have any exports, just go right here. So if you also have some setup or some configuration thing, you just include it in the prepend place here. Add multiple imports if you'd like. But yeah, this is essentially how you do it, and you can get your schema from here, the documents which are the operations, and if you have a configuration, you can include it here. And we're going to now look into the let's change gears and look into the official repository for that specific MSW plugin. The same thing. So you're going to see a lot of code here, but it's essentially the same thing. You have a plugin export that returns a prepend and content, and you have also a validate export, which can validate our configuration and multiple things. So we just make sure that you are actually generating a TypeScript file. So all of this other stuff you can regard as boilerplate. This is what actually matters. But you also see a visitor right here, and it comes from this file. So what is a visitor? When we are working with these things, we have something called an AST, or an abstract syntax tree. That's and we utilize the visitor pattern to work with that abstract syntax tree. Abstract syntax trees are essentially just your code, but represented in an object way. So we're going to take a look at one of these abstract syntax trees and how to work with them inside these plugins. So just before that, we're going to go to this visitor file, and you're going to see it's just a class that gets some configuration and defines some configuration and defines how to work with our operations. And as I said, this visitor pattern essentially boils down to a loop. So you have your code. Let's say, for instance, these import statements. So this is the first statement, the second statement, and you just the visitor parent allows you to be inside that statement one statement at a time. We call them nodes. So when you are inside that node, you can look for whatever you want. You can look at what type is that node. Is it an import type? Is it a declaration of a variable? Is it a function call? Is it this? And you do things conditionally as you discover things. So it's just a loop, and whenever you are inside that loop, you can look for things and define what you want to see, and do things based on those findings. So right here, as I explained before, we have this build operation, and this is the moment where the GraphQL Codegen goes through your operations and define each node. And what we all doing here is just using these operations to include and pushing into it. So we can have one place with all the nodes that we are interested in to work with in multiple places. These two places are get imports and get content, the same methods that we are using here for our prepend and content. So in our imports, we actually don't really require the collected operations. We just make sure that there are actually operations and the length is greater than 0. As for the content, we loop through these operations and get things from configuration and stuff. But essentially, we're just concatenating stuff into this nice string, and this is what gets generated. Just we get the operation variables, the type, and the operation name and stuff, and we just organized in a manner that when generated, it would be valid code and we can use it. But the magic that ASC provides us is in these 2 blocks of code. And to wrap this, to get our head around this, we're going to go to something called ASC Explorer. So when you look at this, you have you can look for ASCs for CSS, JavaScript, anything. But we are working with GraphQL today, so this is what we have. And yeah, you just click on the thing that you are interested in knowing about. So if we want to know about these, what we call selections, you just have to click on them, and it gives you what's that thing in the ASC. So when you click on the user piece of code, you're gonna notice that we are going from the parent node, which is the document, and looking through our selection set, which is an object, then our selections, which is an array. And each selection has a name and value, and that value is what we are looking for. So if we click on author, the same thing, but it's a value inside name, inside selection, inside our selection set. And this is the thing we are doing here. So the global node, or this specific node that we are on, and we get the selection set, our selections, and for each selection we get its name and its value, and we just join them together with a comma. The same goes for our variables. So when we think of our variables, you may be tempted to go and look for these variables, but we're actually interested in the variables that we define as operation authors. So when we hover or click on this, we can see that it's inside a variable definitions, which is an array. So we're going to have to loop over this and get a variable object and get a name, then a value. And this is exactly what we're doing. So the node variable definitions, our map, variable name, value, and we concatenate there. Yeah, and we include this in our generated plugin. So yeah, you can also look at how configuration is done. You're just going to have to define an interface and request it like this in the. Let me go to the wizard. Yeah, just ask for it in this.config, and if you have that config actually defined, you can do things one way. If you don't, you do it another way. And using this, you generate your you generate your code, and you can use TypeScript with whatever you want. And if we have any questions, we can tackle those.
Awesome. Thanks. I'll take that back. Thanks. That was really interesting. My favorite part was the aliasing and fragments. I just got a response that was called keys that only ever returned one. Or no, it wasn't keys. It was called tags that only ever returned one tag. I was like, oh, this is terrible. Yeah, that was really interesting.
And you would go to the backend guys, and tell them about the typo, and the typo is never going to be fixed.
It was, a third party. Like,
oh,
I can't reach
yeah.
out to this other company and be like, go fix your yeah. So that was awesome, super in depth. Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? We didn't get any during. Cool. Looks like a no. Well, thanks a lot. Yeah, the recording will get sent out along with some links to a lot of that code we just went through. So see y'all later. Appreciate it.